now.
Hello, so I'm Louis, and I kind of work in the non-profit industry. I run a non-profit organisation just around the corner, and we essentially, I started it when I graduated from university 4 years ago now, and I've been working there since. So I graduated from architecture, interested in cities, but this system we're developing has really emerged from our understandings in the last 4 years. We've been developing it and thinking about kind of new, different kind of alternative economies that we might be able to create within our cities that allow non-profit businesses to be better supported globally. So this means being better supported in terms of the work that they do, but also allows kind of wonderful work in our communities to really just be kind of enabled by the communities that have lots of value. So this is, oh God, this is not going to happen, is it? The request access, we're not going to be able to do it in time. So essentially, I was going to start off with a video that was talking about automation from the 60s, and I can share this video with you, but it was looking at how people in the 60s were already discussing topics around automation, and the idea that actually they believed at that time that we would have an abundance of free time because of the free things, because there'll be a surplus of goods, because they'll be created by machines. A lot of the things will be created by machines. So they had this vision of the future which was like slightly utopic, and kind of had this idea of actually the ground would reach a point of human civilization where the ground will be able to like put our hands in the earth, and up from it would spring some kind of, you know, anything you desired, like so you could get pizza from the ground, or, you know, there were these insane visions, but really like in terms of their abstraction, they still kind of have relevance. We can do this with, like, you know, Uber or Airbnb or anything like that. It's kind of a manifestation of that. But on the other hand, what we really see, the landscape of the future, is not so much that, but it's kind of become this. Like, so 40% of the world's food is wasted currently, and there's, I'll go to this. It's a little bit glitchy because I'm not sure what's happened with the Google Doc, but we'll have to go through that. So essentially there's huge construction waste. There's over 100 million tonnes of were wasted in 2012. Household waste, 26.5 million tonnes generated from households. Food waste, 7 million tonnes of food were thrown away. So this is what we're interested in, all of these things. But one shocking statistic is that 40% of the world's food is wasted, meaning 40% of the places that are selling food could technically be giving it away for free. And this reflects the kind of freedom that these idealistic people and the kind of the 60s and 70s were really looking for and aiming towards. Open source software, open source culture, all of this kind of, these magnificent ideas emerge from this kind of extensive idealism, which is really, really important to remember, because now we're living in a city, and many cities kind of resemble it, where there's, you know, 40% of the world food is wasted. Jobs, people kind of out on the streets, you know, like can't afford to eat, yet while at the same time there's loads of food being wasted. People are feeling alone, eating alone. There's like a real bubble between different kind of social groups, societal groups, really aren't connecting. And there's huge amounts of empty and vacant land, and there's actually empty opportunities. So there's like great, like, you know, there's huge plains of lands that could be developed on, but really there's no kind of infrastructure to allow community development and all of these kind of new ways of allowing abundance to emerge. So we created the Foodhall Project as a prototype in a kind of forward-thinking exchange and living and being together. So the Foodhall Project was an open public space for sharing food and culture and community, and this was really the idea that you could kind of subvert 3 different things. You could subvert like a building, you could subvert the objects, you could subvert the kind of food, and you could create something entirely and completely free, or what I would define as public. And this is super important as a methodology, because we created this this kind of wonderful community space where kind of all humans were equal, because we removed the boundaries of payment. So like we encounter every day in the food hall, just like the most diverse range of human interactions you'll ever imagine. Like, so this is kind of day to day. I'll see a homeless person talking to a millionaire. I'll see a person kind of that's really like in a terrible situation with their life. They've maybe like had drug addiction problems, and they'll be being helped by another person in a similar circumstance in this kind of space. And actually, we've seen over the years we've been working there, we've seen complete transformations in some of the people that have originally come. They've discovered community, they've discovered kind of new ways of being together, and they've built themselves up from that. And actually, many of the people that were originally homeless that came in are now housed, and they have good jobs and so on. And this kind of like incredible thing of creating something public and generous and giving people an abundance is actually the main factor that will alleviate poverty. And it's obvious, right? If you create a system which alleviates poverty because you just allow people to access abundance. Sorry, it's incredibly pixelated. I promise you they weren't that pixelated before, but I can't draw like in that pixelated way. I wish I could. It'd be cool. But essentially what we were like there. This is what we found. We've discovered, and we discovered that there's over 3,400 non-profit organisations operating in Sheffield alone. So 3,000, yeah, over 3,500 non-profit organisations, and we've discovered that we're kind of experiencing exactly the same problems as most of the other ones are. Like, there's this kind of transactional system which happens in a day-to-day environment, places like this, and then there's kind of us, you know, which are kind of operating below the radar or under the scenes, and 3,500 other organisations are doing the same too. They can't access. Their value that they're generating day to day really can't be understood by anyone but the people who are directly benefiting from this value. This is a huge problem. So there's this kind of vision, which is like, right here we have, company one, company two, company three, and they have this shared system of value transaction where you make arrangements between your companies, and then your staff, they can interrelate with one another. So you have this like, the value they've created is squared because they have so many more people that are part of this huge network of like, interrelating with one another. And then we've got voluntary organisation 1, 2, 3 and 4, just as many people doing as much valuable community work, but we're kind of completely disconnected from one another, or even can't even interoperate with the shared value system that's happening. So in the discrete pockets of our kind of cities, there'll be these large problems that will kind of escalate and develop because people can't support them adequately. So this is what we call, I guess, a wicked problem, and this is my definition, my Dr. Robotnik's beam machine of like, things piling up on each other, where the impact is not collected in a standard way, which means there's a huge lack of insights, there's difficulty scaling and connecting any kind of action or acts with each other, there's a difficulty to discover and support these actions from outside, the actions don't retain any value beyond a local exchange. So you see this with the original kind of hippie communities of the 60s, they all died out because actually the value wasn't relevant beyond that community. It had no value, beyond that community. It was like, well, they all became dropouts, and that's all they were seen as, even though they might have worked their entire lives towards that public service provision or towards a really important thing in our society. Automation, on top of this, is replacing jobs. So we think about it, as predicted, there's going to be more and more jobs that will be replaced. 50% of the jobs by 2050, for instance. I'm not sure if that's right, but I'm pretty sure it is. It changes every day depending on if you read the Independent or the Guardian or whatever. But generally, 50% of jobs will be replaced and automated. So, the voluntary economy is going to be huge. Like, it's going to expand exponentially over the next 50 years. And that's super important to understand, because unless we kind of take the voluntary economy seriously, what we're going to find is we're going to have a lot of people in voluntary positions that will have no way of interrelating with both one another and the wider society that should actually be supporting each other as a large community. And you'll end up with this, like people needing jobs, people being homeless and more, and that's what we see. It's like this wicked problem. incredible, like, evil problem that we have to solve. Is just the economy of the voluntary organisation. So we're trying to tackle this. I mean, that's the abstract problem. But we're trying to tackle this with kind of a new system, a blockchain system, a new technology, like creating an application which allows people to be supported. So I'll go into how that will happen in a moment. This is just a few screenshots of our user interface. So essentially you have, rather than, you have non-profit groups and community groups can distribute tokens within their local area. The volunteers then essentially get this token by recording the activity. So the voluntary groups don't necessarily have to record the activity themselves, they just have to approve activity that's being done for them by a volunteer. And this is something that happens on paper all of the time, actually. You know, people volunteer places and then they, and then with this, you'll have access to people with surpluses or people maybe that have corporate social responsibility or kind of any other kind of volunteering certificate or maybe informal qualifications. You can emerge by actually giving value to voluntary sector activity. And within this system, we can also allow people, donors, people who maybe can't support adequately impact or couldn't in the past, they now can see where the interaction's happening, what it is, and how they can support it properly. So I might be able to tip volunteers, I might be able to fund non-profits, I might be able to use escrow contracts to ensure that the causes I care about are solved. And that will enable a better society to emerge, because rather than, oh, I'm not sure if I've got the image here, but rather than money or being generated from a few kind of ring-fenced, discrete and opaque places like arbitrage or, expanding your colonies or, like created in through kind of opaque banking systems, what we create is a monetary system that is created from the community and the grassroots, which is, I think, is the most important thing. And so this is an image. We kind of thinking, basically, it's going to be based around time, the concept of time. The idea of human time, and people will be able to, as I said, log receive hours, they'll be able to transact with these hours, and then they'll be able to kind of define or vote which causes they want to support next. Yeah, access rewards, going over the similar things, but so surpluses are a huge issue, as I mentioned. So say, for example, we in the Foodhall Project get all of our food donated from Tesco's or Sainsbury's, but we're an organisation that has an organisational capacity, and the problem is we can't deal with all of these donations that we're getting. So by changing the way we log time within our organisation, we can expand, and within kind of multiple organisations, so like Oxfam and 50, 60 other organisations across the country. It allows their volunteer force to receive support rather than the organisation directly. So this means that if the volunteers, the army runs on its stomach, for example. So you kind of begins to shift the focus from okay, let's give the charity, let's give it directly to charity. You kind of realise that most of the people working in disadvantaged communities are actually from the disadvantaged communities themselves, and actually by supporting the volunteer force, you incentivise mutual aid and regeneration of cities in a way that was unfathomable before. So yeah, this also gives the ability to search voluntary organisations. These are kind of end user functions. Things like, okay, where do I volunteer today? How can I help people? How can I actually support people in new ways? And also see your impact. So reporting for voluntary organisations is really, really difficult. It takes up so much of your time because it's always done it's not done within your processes, it's actually done as an external measure. So you kind of are doing one humongous voluntary act by actually trying to help the community, and then you've got this entirely different voluntary act which is kind of making this really extensive impact report. And what you see is the way you help how much you can actually help the community is completely all of the efforts are sucked by these huge tasks, and as you want to get more and more funding, you need to compile more and more and more and more reports reports and more, you know, so you have these charities now that are doing nothing, compiling reports. You have these kind of like huge issues of kind of charity transparency. You also find that 5% of charities and non-profits reported their impact, you know, like in 2016, and like 5% is like, it's unbelievable for an entire industry to not report its info, you know, at that scale. It's because there's an issue of logging time, and there's an issue of accountability, and an issue of understanding what value that thing has. Also, as I said, systems funding. Systems funding is really important. It means that you don't just look at a problem in silo, you look at a problem as an entire system of interconnected and interoperable issues. Yeah, I'm going to wrap. Okay, good. So these issues, so like for instance, I might be able to see, rather than fund a large organisation like that, I might actually fund kind of discrete pockets, 4 discrete pockets, and then that might solve homelessness in a genuine way. Rather than, so in terms of what the volunteers can get from this, like this is what we're trying to look at implementing in Sheffield. Sheffield's going to be a little lovely prototype city where we're going to trial out and just get loads of feedback on it. We're from the grassroots, so we're just going to kind of keep on getting feedback and keep on developing it from that perspective. We're working with Party for the People and Tickets for Good on access to event tickets. So like all of the students will be able to kind of volunteer in their local community, get tickets to Glastonbury. And this is what we, you know, that will be a huge incentive of popularisation or something like this, making it cool. Access to travel, subsidiaries. People who are, you know, in disadvantaged communities, maybe they need to, you know, travel is a big issue for them. So actually creating systems where you can access travel. Access to goods and services, I mentioned, surpluses, etc. Access to space use, access to kind of new communities, subsidiaries for kind of rent, subsidiaries for energy, evidence for informal qualifications, volunteer certificates, etc. Universal credits being rolled out, as I mentioned, as we know, like things like housing benefit. This becomes more and more important, the adequate measurement of time within voluntary sector communities. And the reason we have poverty, in my opinion, is because we don't actually value the time that people put in their local communities. And corporate social responsibility, if you collect these, you just kind of print it out and you'll have a clear indication of how much you've actually helped the local community, and your corporate social responsibility kind of accountability, you know, it's automatic. So this is essentially what we're kind of looking at. Is like we're proposing that you have this current system where the means of producing value is removed from the ends of producing value, but we want to create a system where the means of producing value matches the ends of producing value. In other words, where it's needed. So I was going to go on to something we did recently. We can wrap up if you
need to. We've got 2 more minutes.
Okay, all right. So we've been testing it. I'm part of an organisation called IASA, European Assembly of Student Architects. I represent the UK there, and we tested it as an economy for 500, 600 people, and we kind of created a network of users, and this was in Rijeka like a month and a half ago. Network of users, little businesses, testing it to breaking point basically, and yeah, we've gathered a lot of feedback from that process, and that's the way we're doing it. It's kind of iterative development. Created some really cool stuff like small street-side public libraries where people could kind of like borrow books with the currency, and I think novel and more exotic ways of interrelating with one another will develop. This is one of the things we built. This is a kind of community meal hosted with the currency as its basis, where you volunteer in your local community and you use it for a community meal. Super cool, and we create this huge sign which says the currency of the future is the currency of kindness, as a bit of a kind of promotional campaign for it. So yeah, thanks guys for listening to me, and if you can support it, I mean, you know, please do.
What do you need?
So we're looking for a few things. We're looking for, I mean, we're a grassroots organisation, so we need support from people. I'm going to just jump the gun, but like people who have some money to support it, pay more people to help develop it, and actually pay the developers, because they're all working on a voluntary capacity at the moment, you know, to actually live a little bit. That'd be great. Secondly, kind of support in terms of like, you know, interrelating or connecting to the schemes that you're doing, you know, things like transport and things like that. We need to develop the network, and we just need to experiment in Sheffield, like where it can work and where it can't work. And if you kind of have or think of ways that it could connect to the things that you're doing, please just approach us and just kind of we'll work out how and try and figure out how we can do things. And thirdly, we're experimenting with we want to kind of link with local authorities more and look at the ideas of different kinds of ways of offering public services and things like that from a community basis as well as a top-down basis. So yeah, I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks very much.